Welcome to the fourth in the series of starting a new nonprofit. What we're going to talk about today is choosing the right strategy to set up your nonprofit. The programs that your nonprofit offers will be the why that your organization exists. Now you'll need to determine how you're going to deliver those programs, and are you going to have paid staff or are you just going to use volunteers? A well-designed plan for how to carry out the programs will ensure the success of serving your constituents and obtaining funding. We'll talk about the software that you're going to need to operate your nonprofit and what should be on the website. But first, let's talk about your assignment. The first assignment was for you to write names of people in the roles and responsibilities chart who may be interested in your new nonprofit, and then to choose 5 people from the list who you could call and ask for their advice on who you should contact. See, even nonprofits who have been around a while, this is something that I work with them on all the time. And the reason is because that will be how we get our funding. And so that was the program we did for number 3. But that's why that we need to do this. And asking people for advice. When we ask for advice, we get money. When we ask for money, we get advice. And so, especially with a new nonprofit, it's important for you to ask for advice from people. And so compiling that list. So if you didn't do this last time, I would highly suggest it. All right, so here is our agenda. I've gone over it a little bit so far, but we're going to talk about the structure of your nonprofit administration, and then your programs and events, your ideas for website analysis, and then reviewing what you need to look for in your donor database. So let's start out with the structure of your nonprofit administration. So your tasks and responsibilities. Now, before I show you this chart, I don't want you to freak out and think, oh no, I can't do this, because these are all the areas that need to be covered in your nonprofit. It does not mean that you need to hire people for each of these tasks. And I talk about this more in my book, but I think it's important for someone who's starting a new nonprofit like you are to know what the full breadth of what they need to look at. So here we go. So this is what it looks like. And so this is just the development staff. This does not include all of your programs, etc. So that's on another chart that we'll talk about in just a minute. Okay, so let's talk about the executive leadership. Most likely, you are going to be the executive director. Yes, you can be on the board as an executive director. Typically, what I suggest is, if you're going to be a board member, that you are ex officio. I really don't like for the executive director to be a voting member of the board. It just is kind of weird, because the executive director reports to the board chair. And so when you have that executive director who sits on the board, it's just kind of messy. And so sometimes people do it, so there's nothing wrong with doing it. But especially with you being the founder of this organization and you sitting on the board as a voting member, and so what some nonprofits have done, because they're like, oh, this is my baby, I can't just let it go to this board. They've put some family members on their board, and knowing that the family members will be able to have the vote that they would have had. Okay, so we're talking about executive leadership here. So this is the leadership and the direction. This is the person who does the strategic visioning, the major gift fundraising. So those are your larger gifts. Does staff training and skill development, and the the executive director is going to need to manage up and manage down. And another question I get a lot is, does that position have to be called executive director? And it doesn't. Sometimes you'll see CEO, chief executive officer. Sometimes you'll see president. Sometimes you'll see president and CEO. And so it just depends on what your title you would like it to be and what the board would like it to be. So that is one position that you really have to have, is that executive director. I have seen a board chair who also acts as executive director without the title. I just, again, I feel like you need an executive director. And since you're starting the nonprofit, that can be you. All right, so then the next category there is called fundraising. And so this is the individual fundraising. This is the person that prepares proposals, completes the contact reports that go into the donor database, and they talk about plan giving. Now, most new nonprofits, they don't have a separate fundraiser. So you as executive director are probably going to take on that fundraising role. And then we have grants. That's corporate and foundation relations, somebody who does prospect research for grants, grant writing, progress reporting, grants tracking, and calendar. You all know how I feel about grants. I think that it takes a lot of time to write the grants, and it takes a lot of time to realize the money that comes from the grants, and you have a ton of competition. So especially if you're a one-person show, to try to spend time writing grants, unless that they're short. We have some grants here in Eagle County that are very, you fill out 4 things and you're done with it. That's a different story. I'm talking about the longer grants. Now, I just had somebody call me the other day and said, hey, we're looking for a grant writer. I get that request a lot. People saying, oh, we just want a part-time grant writer. We just want somebody to write some grants for us. Typically, that is not the thing that's going to bring in the money that you need as a new nonprofit. Because you've heard me say this before, part of the problem is that when you go to a granting foundation and you're a new nonprofit, they don't do, my air quotes, startups. And so you're already at a disadvantage because you don't have enough history track record. However, part of the grants sometimes are family trusts and family foundations, like I've talked about before. Some of them require an LOI, which is a letter of intent, or a grant application. It's just a very short grant application. Now, those are individuals because they're family foundations or family trusts. So I'm not including them in that grants category. Okay, special events. Most likely, your nonprofit is going to need to have some kind of special event. And if you had somebody that was just in this position, it would be somebody that's an event manager. They would do ticket sales. They would do sponsorships in kind, which would be somebody gives you tickets to something or coupons for something. And then there's the donor event fundraising. Because of COVID and pandemic and everybody being locked down, I've encouraged nonprofits to rethink that word events and to think outside the typical gala and think outside the golf tournament. Think outside the types of events, one-time events that you would do before, and instead look at like peer-to-peer fundraising and let people form teams and raise money that way. Come up with fun games that people can play over a period of time. And so when we talk about special events, your nonprofit is going to need some special events, but they might not be the kind of events that you've thought of in the past. I don't think early on that you need someone specifically in that position. Now, if you're going to create a gala, I would highly recommend that you hire a consultant. There are some very good event consultants that don't cost that much, and they will help you raise more money. And a lot of times it's worth it to hire somebody like that. Okay, then we talk about the database. Now, A lot of times new nonprofits are like, oh, I've got this, we've got our Excel spreadsheet, we're good. I get up on my soapbox about this because an Excel spreadsheet cannot give you the information that you need. It can't categorize, and no matter what nonprofit says to you, oh, no, we don't need a database, we're fine. Almost always they come back to me and say, I've got to get off these Excel spreadsheets. Because what a donor database is going to do is it's not only a place to keep the names and contact information of your donors, but it's a place to keep notes on what you want to remember about these donors. Imagine if you try to keep building out an Excel spreadsheet and putting notes columns after notes columns, and you're trying to figure out, when should I contact this person again, or when was the last time I contacted this person? Is it time? So there are some databases out there that are free. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. They're free up to a certain number of constituents. And I think one of these is a very good database. There's some other ones that I've heard about too, that there's more that keep coming online. But bottom line, you need a database. Now, do you need a person that has a specific position that will be a database person? No, you need to know enough, or you need a volunteer. Many times there is a board member that's like, oh, I love computer stuff, let me do the database. So you can let somebody like that do it. But what they need to do is they not only need to maintain the database, but do gift entry. I just had somebody tell me yesterday that their executive director enters gifts. No, do not do that. I've had fundraisers who enter gifts. Don't do that. There needs to be a firewall between the person who raises the money and the person who puts that into the database. The reason is it's for the protection of the executive director, protection of the fundraiser, and protection of the organization in case that there's some money that it has been entered at a different amount than it was brought in or something. So even if you have to have a bookkeeper that you hire part-time to enter the gifts, I would suggest that. You'll be able to query the database, and whether you want to send out appeal letters or invitations or whatever. And then the thank yous and acknowledgements. So every time somebody sends you a gift, a donation, you will send them an acknowledgement letter that tells them you're a 501c3 and that they'll need to talk to their tax accountant, but that it is available for a tax write-off. And then when people make pledges, so the database will help you be able to do that. Okay, so now what about support? Like, what kind of support does the fundraising and development department need? Well, it really helps if you have somebody that's a board liaison. Depending on how many people you have on your board and how involved they are, that can take up a lot of your time. And so sometimes I've had an assistant in the past. A lot of people have virtual assistants these days, and they're kind of the go-between, because sometimes a board member's like, what's your mailing address, or where would I drop this off, or things that you as executive director don't really need to be answering and spending your time on. Then the support person can coordinate different types of visitors. Some people use a volunteer to do that. And then the financial budgeting, etc. This person can help in that role to help your bookkeeper or your accountant. And then we have our marketing. So the marketing person or function supports all the fundraising materials. This is your case statement. This is your annual report. This is any communications, newsletters, and your social media. So any of these things can be pretty overwhelming if you're trying to do them too. So again, sometimes you'll have a volunteer. Many boards look for a marketing person to be on their board and let that volunteer marketing person do that piece of it. Okay, so other nonprofit organization responsibilities. Okay, so you have your programs, right? And so we have talked about those programs and um, the the leadership and direction of those. You as executive director are going to need to lead those, but you don't necessarily need to run all the programs. And so sometimes we have, interns or that we can train to do that. I've had some great interns over the past that's been able to do that. And then human resources fall into that programs because there are people who need to be hired, most likely, as part of that. And then the policies and procedures. Advocacy, be careful with advocacy. As a 501c3, you can lobby for, and I don't know exactly the percentage of time you can lobby for, but it's a very small percentage. I mean, that means even I had an employee come to me and say, hey, one of my friends is running for this county council, for the county council. And I'm going to go hold up a sign in the roundabout. No, you cannot do that, because that says our nonprofit, even though she just works for us, that signals that our nonprofit is doing advocacy and policy and lobbying policy, and you can't do that. So just be very careful with advocacy. There are other types of 501c organizations that can do lobbying. I worked for one organization where there was a huge amount of money paid to lobbyists to lobby the organization. They had no idea. They had gone well outside the percentage that they could lobby. And so what we were able to do was we were able to move that lobbying so that it wasn't coming out of the 501c3. It was actually coming out of the affiliated organization. Okay, so then you've got your whole finance. And again, a part-time bookkeeper is a great idea to do accounts receivable, accounts payable, just to kind of keep you on track and help you report to the board. It's also a good idea to do an audit. Early on in your nonprofit, you're probably not going to need to do that, but an outside auditor can help you when you do start applying for grants. And then you have facilities. So you may not have any facilities early on. You may be doing this out of your house or out of another office, but just know that all of that needs to be scheduled in there. So when we talk about the structure of the paid nonprofit administration, this is the administrative staff. So we are talking about you, most likely executive director. We talked about bookkeeper and finance. A director of development, so that is your chief fundraiser. It could be a vice president, it could be, there's lots of different titles that go with that, but usually that is your chief fundraiser outside of you. And a development associate is somebody that's typically more of an assistant type person. A director of marketing, some point you're going to want a director of marketing, and then your marketing coordinator is just the support for your director of marketing, and then somebody to administer the programs. And you might have more than one program and more than one administrator. Executive assistant's great to have a liaison between the board and then a grant writer eventually, and a database administrator, and then of course a facilities person. So what ones do you need to start off with? I just think you need an executive director, bookkeeper, finance, and a program administrator. And again, all of these other things that are on here that start when you start out, most likely you're going to be at least overseeing those. If you have a volunteer, a board member, or whoever to do some of these tasks till you start bringing some money into the organization. But your organization runs on its programs. So you need a program administrator. And then the bookkeeper and finance, I mean, that I don't care if you have a bookkeeping or a finance degree, just to keep you on track. That's really important. Okay, so let's ask you the question. So why do you think people give money to nonprofits? So I want you to rank the top reason why you think people give money to nonprofits. Is it because they're moved to donate in response to an event in the news? Someone that the donor knows directly asked me to donate. As a gift to a friend, birthday, retirement, they know someone affected by their cause. They're passionate about the cause. It's to memorialize someone. They know the organization I care depends on me. There's an awareness through ads and communication. They saw a post on social media. Okay, so which one do you think is the top one? So think about it just a minute. Okay. Passionate about the cause is number one. So that's what you need to be clear about when we're talking about setting up the nonprofit. What roles do you need to get covered so that you can help people who are passionate about the cause? And then the next one is they know the organization I care about depends on me. So being sure that you let them know that your organization appreciates them and needs their help. One of the things I used to do was we had this great new building with all this medical equipment, medical imaging equipment. Oh, I love that building. And I would take donors in. And after we did the tour, they'd look at me and say, wow, looks like you all don't need anything at all. I learned my lesson. I learned, yes, I would still take them through that nice new building, but then I would take them through the dilapidated building on campus, and they'd walk out and say, wow, that building really needs to be redone, which opens the door. And then the third reason is that they know someone affected by the cause. So being able to do our homework and find who is it that's affected by that cause, because then that will help us know what is it that really resonates with them. Okay, so here is the actual chart. 59% of the people say that they're passionate about the cause. 45% say they know the organization depends on them. And then 33% said they know someone affected by the cause. And then it moves down into these others. They were moved to donate by something in the news, to memorialize somebody. Somebody I know directly asked me to donate, awareness through ads, as a gift to a friend or loved one, saw a post on social media, and then other responses. So just keep that in mind as you look at what are the important positions to hire someone, or to be sure that you have a volunteer or someone on the board. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the board of directors roles. See, the primary role as a board member is to act as a voting member with full authority and responsibility, fiscal responsibility, to develop policies for the operation of the organization, to monitor the organization's financial health programs and overall performance, and to provide the executive director the resources needed to serve the organization's constituencies. So these are the roles and responsibilities of the board member. You know, they need to attend the board meetings regularly. They need to know the organization, and you as executive director and founder need to be sure they know the organization as well as you do, that they come to the meetings prepared and informed about the agenda issues, and they support the fundraising activities. So here are the roles and responsibilities that I like to tell the board of directors. So number one, you're establishing policy. And so when you submitted your 501c3, you submitted your bylaws. But most likely those bylaws will change as you get more board members and the environment changes and things change. And so then they will revise the bylaws. So the board will establish policy. They hire and fire the executive director. which gets in some people's crawl when they say, well, wait a minute, I started this organization and now the board can fire me. And that has happened many times, that founder has been let go of their position as executive director. They need to secure adequate funding. So they have physical responsibility as a board member. And so when you have board members say, oh no, I don't raise money. No, that's not what I do. Well, it is. If you accept the role of a board member, that is what you do. So monitoring finances is another piece of it. That's why you have a finance committee on your board. They will create and update a long-range plan. Now, you as executive director and your development team, you know more about what to put in front of the board. And then the board takes that, and you have hopefully some great minds on your board that then can take that and create a long-range plan. Selecting and supporting the board officers. So when you submit your 501c3, your 1023 paperwork, you had to say who's going to be president, secretary, treasurer, and vice president. Adopting the key operating policies of the organization. And so whether that's financial or, for instance, let's say that there's a gift review committee, which I do suggest that all nonprofits have a gift review committee. We had someone give us solar panels at the college where I was, and the solar panels didn't work. And so we had to dispose of them because it has harmful materials in the solar panels. We had to pay for that disposal. So that's the kind of key operating policies that's important for the board to have a really good understanding of. And then whenever that contracts need to be approved or appointed. Okay, so what kinds of, so here's individual responsibility. So the difference is that was the entire board's responsibility, but then here are the individual board members. So one of the things I like to do is something I call the board decision book. And it has, this is the total board responsibility. This is the individual's responsibility. And here in the next 4 or 5 pages are things that you as a board member can commit to do. And so they can check those off and then they sign it. For instance, sometimes boards have minimums that if you're going to be a board member, you have to give a minimum of $10,000 a year or $2,500 a year or whatever. But other boards say, no, I don't want to do that because there are people who can't give that amount of money, but we really need their expertise on the board. So a lot of times I suggest to the board, you either do a give or get policy with the board. So you establish a dollar amount and say, $10,000 or $5,000 or whatever. And so you have them check off, I'm willing to give that amount of money, at least that amount, or I'm willing to get that amount of money. Because again, they have that responsibility. So that they need to know the organization, attend board meetings, and support the fundraising and development activities. So these are the committees that you need for your board. You need an executive committee. So the executive committee is the one that has the board chair, the vice chair, the secretary, the treasurer. A lot of times major issues are discussed first in the executive committee, and then they're taken to the rest of the board. That means that it doesn't take up the rest of the board's time. There's another committee called Governance or Committee on Directors. This is the backbone of board member recruiting, board member training, creating the bylaws. It's one of the most important committees for your foundation board. Be sure that this committee knows the significance of their role, because you need to be recruiting board members. Even if your board, if you said you were only going to have 5 board members and you've got 5, You always need to be looking for more, and you need to be training those new board members as they come on and talking about the bylaws. Well, your marketing and public relations committee just works with you on marketing and about distributing information to the media. A lot of times somebody on the board loves to do that piece of it. A development committee, so they oversee fundraising activities in conjunction with the executive director, development director, and they educate the board on fundraising and attending fundraising events. The development committee or fundraising committee is not totally responsible for getting all of the fundraising on the board. They are responsible for educating the board and helping the board. And then we have the program or event committee. They focus mainly on the planning and execution of the event. They also might advise on recruiting of volunteers because they've seen people who have volunteered for events. Strategic planning committee, they revise or update the strategic plan as needed. That's not usually a committee that just keeps going on and on and on. It's usually formed at periods of time. Finance committee is one of the most important committees because they manage the investments and the endowments, and then they make recommendations for future money spending allocations. Let's talk about programming. Remember way back when we talked about the 1023 and you filled out your paperwork? I want you to go pull that out again. What's the activity that you're going to be doing? Who conducts the activity? Where is it conducted? What percentage of the total time is allocated to the activity? How's the activity funded? Donations, fees, etc. And how does the activity further your exempt purposes? I pulled this back in right here because the programming that your nonprofit does sits within what you described needs to be done. Okay, so as we look at that programming and event, ask yourself the question, what is unique to our cause that's going to stand out? And how are we going to get and gather our impact stories to demonstrate how we make a difference? So every program you do early on, you need to be asking people for, how did this go? And what did you like? And what should we change? And be sure you look at how you can showcase your mission. You're looking for real life heroes to feature. This is where I keep coming back to the impact is that you changed someone's life. You made a difference in a person's life. And I put this ebook up there because I wrote an ebook for one cause, and it was called 29 Creative Fundraising Ideas for Virtual Events. So I'm not going to go into all of that because you can go through there and you can just see there's lots of events that are kind of your non-event that you could use for your new nonprofit. And so I'll put that in the follow-up information so that you'll have that. So let's move to talking about your website. Now, the website needs a donate button. I know nonprofits, they get really nervous about putting a donate button. You've got to help people who come to your website know how to give you money. That donate button needs to be in the upper right-hand corner of your website. Over there, the far right, the last thing that you see, because you have your menu across the top there, and then you need your donate button. Some of the research says that it needs to be either in red or in blue. I don't know that that's exactly the case, but you just need an upper right-hand corner. Be sure that your website is written for donors and not participants. Now, if let's say you're running a summer camp and you're trying to get kids into the camp and they're coming to your website to sign up for the camp, that's different. But I want to see you have a page Even if that's the case, a page that's just for donors, it's just donor specific. You want somebody to come to your website and say, wow, I want to get involved with that. I wonder how I could help. So many times you go to a website and the donor's like, this doesn't relate to me. They're just talking about kids, or they're just talking about dogs, or you want to be able to relate to those donors. You want to have impact stories. So be sure that your stories have in there how your nonprofit changed somebody's life. Now, you're a new nonprofit, you don't have any impact stories, especially if, let's say, you're working with kids right now, and until they get to college and go into med school, you won't show how you really changed their life. So maybe it's many years down the road. So how do you show impact? Well, it may be that you use stories from other similar organizations. So you're not going to steal somebody else's story from another nonprofit, but what you're going to do is you're going to hear parents talk. So for instance, I was working with this one school, and the mother, the assistant, she said, I'm a mother, and my boy was not doing well in public school. And so I brought him over here because I worked here, and it changed his life. So I mean, just like that. So you need to be looking for those impact stories. So you need to make it easy for the donor to donate. So what that means is that when they click on that donate button on the upper right-hand side, it takes them to a page. Your donation will impact this many people, and it will do this, and it will do this, and it will do this. So 2 or 3 lines. And then here's the form. Fill out your name and address. If you can auto-populate, all the better. And fill in your credit card, and then when they hit the submit button, then it gives them a nice thank you. It sends them an email, thank you for your donation, and then you follow up with a handwritten thank you note and an acknowledgement letter. But if they want to send you money, be sure you say that. Here's an address. There are so many nonprofits that do not have an address on their website. Go rent a P.O. box or something, because we still have people who want to write a check and put it in the mail and send it to you. It doesn't happen as much as it used to, but it still happens. That's why I tell nonprofits you still need to send out an appeal letter in the mail with a pledge card so that people can fill it out and put it in an envelope and send it back. So make it easy for them to donate. Be sure it has about us, about what we do, and you include staff, you include pictures of staff, you include the board, you include pictures of the board. With each staff and board member, I want to see 2 or 3 lines as to a bio, and then I want to see the reason that I'm involved with this nonprofit is it means this to me. Staff, the reason that I work here is because I believe in. Because with the inside family, when we as donors see that, we're like, wow, this is a great organization. Here are these board members. I mean, they don't even get paid. And look at what they're saying about this organization. And here the staff, even on the inside and seeing the soft underbelly, they enjoy working here. And then sponsors and or donors names. Okay, so this is a thing that I'm not sure how to tell you about this. Okay, so typically what happens, you print your annual report every year, and a lot of nonprofits put their donors in that annual report. Although we are seeing more and more donors who say, I don't want my name listed, just make me anonymous. Because what happens is other nonprofits take those lists and then they put those people in their database and they start soliciting them. So we're seeing more and more of that happen. But here's something that was really kind of surprising that happened was somebody put their annual report online and it had donors' names in it. Well, they got sued for it because the donor never agreed to have their name out there in cyber world. They agreed to have it in print media. So what I typically tell nonprofits is that unless you're having donors say, I want to see my name in print, unless you're having donors say that, I don't know that, especially early on for you, that I would print your donors' names in a list in your annual report. Now, I would thank your donors and I would say, hey, we're thinking about sending an article to the newspaper. Is that okay? And including your name. Be aware though, I did that with one donor. They had given us a really nice gift. I approved it. It was a family foundation. I got it approved. I sent it to the newspaper. They frantically called me back and said, oh, we're sorry. No, we really don't want that information out there. How do you unsend something to a reporter at the newspaper? Luckily, I had a good enough relationship with the reporter that he pulled it and didn't put it in the newspaper. But being sure in your database that we talked about, being sure that you say if somebody wants to be anonymous and that you actually ask them that question. So these are the things that we're looking for when I am evaluating donor databases for my clients, because they ask me, which database? So these are the things I look at. So is there email integration? So you want to ask the question, can you send emails directly from your database and that then it'll populate? So let's say if you use something like Outlook or you use some other kind of mail program, will it populate that so that you have copies of those emails? So is there some kind of email integration? Is there online donation and processing with security? So, when you see the CAPTCHA where you have to type in the letters, so does it have some type of CAPTCHA? So if you're using this donor database and you're using their online donation, does it have security? And does it have that online donation? Does it go through PayPal? How is it processed? Some people ask me, about PayPal as opposed to Stripe. Their fees are about the same. It's kind of sixes. A lot of nonprofits use Stripe, but a lot of them also use PayPal. Just be sure that there's the security on there. You want to be sure that it helps you track pledges. So let's say that you're starting your nonprofit and you've asked somebody for $25,000 and they're like, oh, I can't give $25,000. And you say, well, could you give 5,000 and do that every year for 5 years? We see more 3-year pledges than 5-year pledges these days, but some people still give 5-year pledges. So you want a database that can track those pledges, because what tends to happen is the donor forgets. They don't remember when that they said that they were going to give a pledge and say, okay, because you ask them, when do you want us to send the pledge reminder? They don't remember. So we've got to find a way to remember. And so pledge tracking within the database really helps. Will it send acknowledgement letters? So some of the databases do a really good job. They pull all the information that you've entered into the database, and you can automatically send the acknowledgement letters. You still have to manually tell it to do it, but still, it's easier. You get reports, where did your major donors come from? And what do you need to be looking at, and who gives at a certain time of the year? It's all about donor-centered fundraising and asking them at the time that they typically like to give. That you can export it into Excel, and then you can take that database And you can then manipulate it and say, who were our top givers last year? Who are our top all-time givers? Who gave in the month of December? So you want to be sure it will export to either Excel, or if you use numbers, whatever is easiest for you. You want to be sure there's a dashboard so that you can make notes in that database that then you say, you know, on this certain date, I want to contact somebody, and you want it to be able to pop up. Being cloud-based is really important if there's more than just you that accesses that database. If you have a board member who's accessing it, or other employees, or an assistant or something, so that it can be real time. You want a way to do recurring donations, because sometimes people want to be a monthly giver. I just had somebody the other day say, we're doing a monthly giving campaign. And many times you say, monthly gifts are really small, but you get enough of those really small gifts coming in that people give every single month, and it makes a difference. You want a database that can mail merge letters. So what that means is that you can print out or export the names and addresses, and then you can import them directly into the letters. Having a well screening plug-in is so important. And granted, there are some databases that have the well screening as a part of it, and you just pay extra for that plug-in. Or you can get a wealth screening out here, and some of the databases play well with some of the third-party wealth screening. And I think we've talked about wealth screening. It's not just for wealth. It helps us see who people know, relationship science. It shows us what they may have given to, what they may want to give to. Looking at setup costs, some of the databases, the monthly fee or their annual fee is low. But then, you want help uploading your Excel document into there? Well, you want, and so everything is an add-on. So just be careful about those setup costs. I think some of the ones that charge, like $1,500 or $1,000 to take all of your names and upload them, it's well worth it, because I've done it where I did it myself instead of paying that. And I mean, it took forever. If your bookkeeper uses QuickBooks, which I would highly recommend that, if your bookkeeper uses QuickBooks, will it import into QuickBooks? And so will it talk to QuickBooks? Some of the programs, the databases, have a financial program that's a part of it. So just know that you can ask that question. So those are the kind of questions that I ask when I'm looking at a database. So we come to the end of setting up your nonprofit. And so as we have gone through all of this, I hope that right now you are feeling inspired and ready to set up your nonprofit.